Welcome to this, the first in a series of short videos where we have a look back on Borrisoleigh and what it was like in former years, and a look back on some of the forgotten places and some of the forgotten characters of the village. And here where this metal gate is today on Chapel Street, that was where the grocery shop of Mary Ellen Gilmartin was. And Mary Ellen, her father was a man called Thomas Phelan. He was a native of County Laois, and he came to Borrisoleigh with the revenue police. And when that force was disbanded in 1856, they were subsumed into the Irish Constabulary, and Thomas Phelan was part of that force. Married a local Kennedy girl, and they opened a business in Chapel Street where that gate is today. The house next door, the three-storey house, in my memory was uninhabited, and the ground floor had a large display window, and behind that was lovely ornate china and household goods like that. But we would remember mostly not for the china but for the cobwebs that seemed to be permanent there. Mary Ellen Gilmartin, she was a woman of extreme piety and a religious woman, and it was said that during Lent and fast days that she weighed the food that she was about to eat so as not to exceed whatever the regulations were at that time. In common with most shops, grocery shops, except news agencies, she didn't open on a Sunday. But I remember on a limited number of occasions my mother would meet her at Mass in Borrisoleigh, at first Mass, and my mother would short or something. If memory serves me right, it was usually Bisto, and she'd implore Mary Ellen to open the shop, to give her what she wanted, and we'd traipse down after Mass, and we'd stand at the front door, the hall door, and Mary Ellen would go into the shop, get what was wanted, and come back out and hand it to my mother. No way would she open the shop. Somebody inquired one time from a local wag, Tom Toohey, about Mary Ellen, remarking on her piety and her holiness, and Toohey had a different view. But she was Mary Ellen Gilmartin, but Tom called her Mary Ellen Whelan or Mary Ellen Whelan, and he said, Mary Ellen Whelan, she doesn't take a smoke, she doesn't take a drink, she don't go to the pictures or to a dance, and she wouldn't spend sixpence to see an earthquake. So that was one man's summation on the misfortune of Mary Ellen. Here on the square, the iron cages around the trees, those date back to 1941, and on the Silver Jubilee of the Easter Rising, 16 trees were planted from the corner of the chapel up to the convent gates, and those 16 trees represented the 16 men of 1916 that were executed. We see 3 of them down there on the square today. At that time also, some of the streets in Morris were renamed, and the square took on the name of MacDonagh Square. Lower Street took on the name of Sean Tracy Street. Part of Palace Street was renamed Church Street, and there's some others as well that I can't recall right now. The Skimmers shop in the background was there congregated people in a line along there before Mass on Sunday, and perhaps many of them didn't have met for the previous week, and they'd stand there and exchange the news, and they seemed to time the run to perfection to come out, to enter the church and take their seats just as the priest would be coming out from the sacristy with his altar boys to say Mass. People also gathered at the opposite corner, Ryan Murray's corner, where the Clos de Bar is today, and even though there was no enmity between either groups, it was still a case of them and us. people from Ray Murray's corner did not go over on a Sunday morning to mix with the people at Ray Skimmer's corner, but they all went to the one chapel nonetheless. Here in Chapel Street, two houses, and on the one on the right, both houses boarded up now. On the one on the right lived Tom Holland and his sister Nora, and Tom was a cobbler by trade, and when somebody lived in a pair of boots into Tom and come to collect them, it was maybe any predisposition to striking a bargain. Nora got in her retaliation first. She'd say, God, Tom hadn't been off a job with them pair of boots. Tom was a well-read man, and he read extensively, and he had quite a large library of books, and scarce volumes, rare enough volumes he had, and but he also had a huge admiration or veneration for the British aristocrat, and he liked the English, he said, the English statesman, and when somebody would maybe just maybe gently point out to him maybe that the English statesman wasn't maybe that favourable to Ireland through history, Tom would counter with we were rather an uncivilised old lot. Somebody had to come over to tame us. So that's where Tom Halloran and his sister lived. His sister Nora, she later years she was blind, and she was being receipt of these tapes, this wireless for the blind, and the braille books, and a lovely couple. Both buried in Glenkeen graveyard. There we see again one of the 1916 trees, and that one would be outside what was then Sarah Kennedy Benson's shop on the way up to the convent school, and it was there that people stopped for their sweets and whatever on the way to school, and those little shops, they did pretty okay when parents were going to collect, mothers going to collect their children from school. They often went in there to buy their few bits and pieces. But remember Sarah, again from her religious activities, she was the local agent for the magazine, the Far East. Here in Lower Street, where this site is today, was actually stood two houses that were joined into one, and it was there that I would have recalled a woman called Lena Stapleton. But prior to Lena living there, her sister Mary, and Mary went by the name of Mary Billy. It was the local drop-in centre, and it was there that the Borrisoleigh, the Bush hurling team used to meet, and when the teams amalgamated, that was their meeting house. Everybody was welcome there, provided of course to behave themselves. Now, Mary was a member coming on, and if one was she made an application for an IRA pension, which was successful, and you should read that pension application, you could see that Mary was a pretty active woman back in those years. Now, among the people used to frequent Mary Billy's was a man called Johnny Loudon, and Johnny Loudon's father was a land steward for Carton of Fishmay. Johnny Loudon was an uncle of the minister Rory Quinn. At the time of the blue shirts, when people joined this organisation, they wore this blue shirt to signify the membership of this organisation, and Johnny was one of those. And one night he turns up to Mary Billy's wearing his blue shirt, and Mary promptly hunted him from the door and told him not to come in wearing that, because it was much at variance with her politics. Johnny came back the next night without the blue shirt, but told Mary, that he didn't have it on him, but his politics were still the same. Mary told him that he was welcome to any politics he wanted, but not to come in around the place wearing that. So that was thrashed out of me, amiably enough anyway it was. Mary had a shop there, she had as well in her time. But after Lena's death, it fell into disrepair, and finally it was a danger to the public, and it was knocked ultimately. Here is in Chapel Street is Jack Stapleton's butcher's shop, and when Mary Ellen, when her property went up for sale, she owned a number of little plots around the village, and they were also auctioned off. And Jack Stapleton bought that little one at the right hand side of the entrance into the old chapel. He bought it for £20, and he set up his butcher stall there. Jack was a pretty respected butcher, and he was well in demand, he was. But by today's standards, maybe the hygiene wouldn't be maybe what it should be. And Jack was maybe only a number of years in business in Chapel Street when inspectors began to come around and looking at the hygiene, and Jack didn't measure up to what was wanted anyway, and the butcher shop was ultimately closed. He held on to his slaughterhouse in Palace Street, and there he'd kill animals for people for their deep freeze and such like. At that time there was actually 3 other butcher stalls in Borris. Shea's in Upper Street, Ryan Lanigan's on the Square, and in later years Tom Lahey opened up a butcher stall in Palace Street, where the community centre, at the end of where the community centre stands today. This shop here, Murray's shop, to look at this derelict building today, it would be hard to imagine the thriving trade that once went on in that shop. And the woman, Mrs. Murray, she was a widow, and in that shop she reared 4 children. She also employed a girl, selling the light groceries, the daily papers, the Sunday papers, and what we would remember mostly for was school stationery, copybooks, blotting paper, end pens, nibs, ink. And in that little small space, Mrs. Murray supported herself and her family successfully. The courthouse in Borrisoleigh1 in Lower Street, in 1938, the scene of a huge public meeting when the Glenkeen graveyard was threatened with closure. And it was said that 200 people crammed into the courthouse and another 400 people stood on the streets outside. How true that is, perhaps some degree of exaggeration, but certainly feelings were pretty high around the proposed closing of Glenkeen. The closing of Glenkeen was probably a foregone conclusion. People were invited to give their testimony of, if they had relatives buried there, and to say whether they'd like it to be opened or not. And people did come and do that. But the meeting was just a while in progress when a local man, Tom Crowley from Chapel Street, interrupted the meeting, and he spoke vehemently, spoke from the heart, he did, and he said there'd be no closing of Glenkeen graveyard. He said we'll bury where our fathers and forefathers are buried. He said we'll bury the dead of night if we have to, and he accused the health board of making what he described as making new rules for humanity. And the local TD at the time, Seamus Buckler on Forest, when Tom Crowley was finished giving his piece, Burke felt emboldened, and even though he took the treaty side in the Civil War, and he was known as a man of peace. He said that if the graveyard was closed, that the guns would be brought out of their hiding places and that blood would be spilled. So Glenkeen graveyard didn't close, and it's not closed today. And and thanks to Tom Crowley mostly, and the people who gathered there in that courthouse on that day. In 1902, it was the scene of more chaos when some local people, and Andrew Carr and Michael Sheehy of the United Irish League were agitating on behalf of local farmers for the break-up of the remnants of the Barnan estate. And a number of high-profile court cases took place there. It wasn't successful in 1902, but it came to fruition 6 years later, in 1908, when the land was taken from Andrew and Walter Thompson and was distributed amongst the local people. So that's it for this little short video. Join us again very soon for more stories of Borrisoleigh and the characters who lived in the place and the changes that have taken place in the last number of years.